Hello, today we will talk about an interesting problem or interesting aspects of pushdown automata. So that is, we restrict our attention to pushdown automata of a particular type, namely deterministic ones. Recall that by definition, every PDA by definition is nothing but a non-deterministic PDA, which can also be written like this if you want to highlight non-determinism. So non-determinism is in the inherent definition or nature of pushdown automata. In today's material, we will see what really we can conclude if you restrict our attention only to deterministic variants of pushdown automata. Before giving you a formal definition of a DPDA, let me intuitively mention that this is nothing but DPDA is nothing but a PDA. So DPDA is a PDA with two restrictions. One, a DPDA at every situation has a unique transition to follow. That is, there is no question of any guessing. Okay. So the transition is typically defined by this P, a state, some symbol, maybe epsilon, and some stack symbol, PAA. Go to a state Q, replace that top of the stack by some beta in gamma star. And now here, when we talk about deterministic PDA, so for every given combination of PAA, I have a unique thing. Okay. It's not exactly so. Since this is unique, this also implies that a DPDA cannot get stuck. Okay. So these two are basic observations. At every situation, there is something that the DPDA can do, and that something is unique, and it can never get stuck. Okay. This essentially is the nature of determinism in the context of pushdown automata. In order to make these things clear, I need to make some small adjustments to a PDA. Okay. The first thing is that the end of input is marked by a special symbol, which let us denote by this. Okay. Why this is necessary? The necessity comes here. A non-deterministic PDA can actually guess when the input has ended, and it can make certain certain things, certain transitions based upon that guess. But if DPDA is not allowed to guess, okay, so it will have to see this end of input explicitly in order to understand the end of input is reached. Okay, so this is first modification. Second, you recall that if the stack becomes empty, the PDA gets stuck. Okay. If it is in a final state, it's okay. But this is stuck behavior is not allowed for a DPDA. Okay. And whenever the stack gets empty, any PDA gets stuck. So for the DPDA, we do not allow this thing to happen. Okay. So the bottom marker always stays in the stack at the bottom. So it is impossible for a DPDA to pop this out and make this tab empty. Okay. Because from that point onward, the DPDA essentially gets stuck, and that is not allowed. Okay. 3, the third change I need to make is that, so of course, it is allowed to have some transitions of this form, this, but then it must push that thing back to the stack. Possibly it will write something more. Okay. For some beta in gamma star. So this kind of transitions are allowed, but this cannot be permanently popped out from the stack. Third thing is that, okay, as I mentioned here, for all B, A, and A, there is a unique transition of this form. U beta, but this is not exactly correct. If that is not the case, there must be a unique possibility of this form. Something like this, epsilon A Q beta. So note that epsilon transitions are allowed for DPDA. Okay. But if for a given A, there is no way the machine knows what to do when it is in state P and scans symbol A from the top of the stack, and there is no such, I would say, transition, then there must be some unique transition of the form. You are in state P, cannot consume A, okay. Then without consuming that A, this epsilon transition applies. Okay. And if this is there, then this, even if present, does not apply. Okay. So the machine first consult whether there is a unique transition of this form. If so, it will do it. If not, there must be a transition where what the machine can take without consuming the input A. Okay. So that's the modification. The stack never gets empty, and therefore acceptance by empty stack is not exactly very relevant. So I assume that a DPDA accepts by final state. Okay. And that's an important thing. A DPDA accepts by final state because the stack is never empty. Okay. So, but there is no explicit concept of something called a reject state. And we will later see that this makes a problem, and we need to consider this, something called a reject state. But anyway, a DPDA accepts by final state, but that means in order to accept, DPDA must consume the entire input including this end of input marker, this, and be in a final state. Then only the DPDA accepts, which essentially means in accept configuration. So a string is accepted, so X is accepted if and only if the initial configuration is start state S, the input is X, and this is followed by this, and you have a stack whose content is this initially. This must, in one or more steps, go to some final state Q. Nothing is to be read from the input, okay, including this, and the stack content may be anything, but this must be there. Okay, so this is for some what is that called, Q, in this set of final states, and for some beta in gamma star. Okay, so with these modifications I can define a DPDA. Okay, so this is present from the beginning, the end of input marker. Bottom marker should always be present. Okay, the stack need not be empty, it will never be empty, and therefore this beta need not be empty, and there is a unique transition, and if nothing applies, there must be an epsilon transition of this form. Okay, and this acceptance is by final state. Okay. I will soon give you an example, but before that, let me just define one thing. A L is called a deterministic context-free language. In short, DCFL, if L is the language of some DPDA D. One thing is clear, if a DPDA can be simulated by a normal PDA, non-deterministic PDA, therefore this set of all DCFLs, if L is a DCFL, definitely implies L is a CFL. Okay. The converse is not necessarily true. Okay. Since the converse is not necessarily true, there exist languages which are CFL but not DCFL. Okay. So there exist languages that are context-free but not deterministic context-free. Why? So for the rest of today's talk, for most of the rest of today's talk, I will prove this. Indeed, I will prove it in a roundabout fashion, we will show two things. The deterministic context-free languages are closed under intersection. Closed under complement. And we already know that context-free languages are not closed under complementation. Therefore, these two classes cannot be equal. Okay. And definitely the class of all deterministic context-free languages is a strict subset of context-free languages, class of context-free languages. And they have different properties. So this has to be a strict subclass of this. Okay. Because this inclusion is obvious from here to here, but they are not equal. Okay. So this is the thing that I will prove, and it is not exactly so easy as the next example will show. Okay. But anyway, the important thing here is that in the context of context-free languages, non-determinism implies strictly better language recognition capability. Right. So, in the context of regular languages, non-determinism sometimes helps the description of the language to go or to shrink by an exponential factor. In this context of context-free languages, it actually implies more language recognition power. So non-determinism has a role to play in this context. So this is important. Okay. So better or more language recognition capability. Okay. Anyway, so before proving this, let us see how a deterministic deterministic pushdown automaton works. So it is our old language, a power n, b power n, such that n is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. We have designed a few non-deterministic PDA for this. Okay. So the input is a comma b, and the stack symbol is, earlier we have used this a for this a, and this was the bottom marker, initial bottom marker. Now I use an extra symbol. This stands for reject. Okay, so let's see how it works. So it starts its operation in a start state S. As long as it reads A, it keeps on pushing A. And here I do not have any transition marked by B. Okay. Actually, the machine should also have a transition marked by this. This is not exactly part of the input language, but this must be handled as input. Okay, now when this is B or this end marker, these rules do not apply. However, I have this rule. Read nothing, keep this stack unchanged. Start by start means whatever is there in the stack, keep it there. Go to this state. So if these transitions are applicable, the machine will keep on doing this. As soon as these are not applicable, the machine will use this transition to go to this state. And you understand that the purpose of the state queue is to match B's against these capital A's, okay, that are stored in the stack. So if this is a B is read from the input and one capital A is in the top of the stack, it is simply popped out. Okay. Otherwise, two things may happen. First, let us look at these two. Okay, so this is fine. This is like the earlier thing. Matching one B against one A already read in this state. Okay. Now, if B comes and this bottom of the stack is exposed, okay, what the machine will do, it will now push this new reject symbol at the top of the stack. Okay. So what does it mean? This is the normal operation, earlier operation, normal operation. This essentially means more B's have come than capital A's are pushed in the top of the stack. Okay. So this essentially means more B's than A's. And therefore this must be rejected. And this is done by pushing this R to the top of the stack. Now this state is meant for reading B's only. And at the end, this end marker. Okay. Okay. What happens if A comes here? So this may come if, for example, this is a situation when more B's than A's, so it's something like A, B, B. One A is pushed, that is consumed, and then the bottom marker is exposed. So it's basically a rejection. Put R there. Okay. Then let us see how to handle this capital R symbol. Okay. Here, these essentially means some A has come. So it has read, okay, it must have read some of the B's, otherwise it could not have come here. Okay. So this essentially means some A came after a B. Okay. So this is not of the form A star B star. Okay. So for example, this may happen when I have AA, BA, or I have ABA, BA, something like that. Okay. So syntactically invalid things. So by that time, the stack may or may not be empty in the sense only this bottom marker is exposed. Here the bottom marker is exposed and then A comes. Here bottom marker is not exposed, but still one B is used to cancel one capital A, and then an A has come. Okay. If such a thing happens for a malformed input, it will also stop by pushing that R, that reject symbol, to the top of the stack. Okay. Then let us see how to handle this. Eventually, if everything goes correct, that is, it is of the form A power n, B power n, and numbers exactly match, then the bottom marker will be exposed. So, if the end of input is read, when this bottom marker is exposed, it will keep it as it is and go to this final state. Okay. Otherwise, this is exposed and there are some surplus A's still left. So it's syntactically valid, but the number of A's have become, so it's of the form A star B star, but there are more A's than B's. Okay. So in that case also, end of input is reached, but there are still some surplus A's. in the stack. So that means more A's than B's. Something of this form, AAB. Okay. Then again the machine should reject. And that rejection is done by pushing that R, reject symbol, to the top of the stack. Okay. And this says that whenever this reject symbol is there on the top of the stack, it will simply do nothing other than keeping it there. It will consume nothing from the input. It will consist of replacing R by R. Okay. And after it accepts, this means it must have read this end of input. And it seems a valid reason for accepting. So it's accept state. And thereafter it simply loops. Okay. So it reads nothing. Whatever is there in the stack, it keeps it as it is. Okay. So it should not get stuck here. Okay. At any point, the machine should not get stuck. Okay. So this ensures that. Okay. And you can see that at every, I would say, situation, in every situation, the machine has a unique thing to do, irrespective of whether it is here, or it has found something wrong with this input. Okay. Whatever that, at every step, the machine has something to do. Okay. Okay. And it accepts if and only if it comes here after reading the entire input, including this end marker. Right? End of input marker. Okay. So that's how a deterministic PDA works. Now the question is that I now turn my attention to this question. DCFLs are closed under complement. So, like DFA, it is tempting to switch final and non-final states. Okay. So I will make this a non-final state and make this and this final state. The idea is that this construction as such will not work. Why? Because the acceptance criterion is that the entire input must be read and the machine must be in a final state. Okay. Here you can see if you have a situation like this, AABA, let's say, stack contains A, then one A is consumed by this B, then another A comes. Okay. So in that case, the machine simply pushes this reject symbol to the top of the stack and then keeps on looping. Okay. So this is not processed. After seeing an invalid syntax, a string not of the form A star B star, it will simply loop on this without ever being able to read this. So only this transition applies whenever R is on the top of the stack. Okay. But then these strings must be accepted because they are not in the language, in this language. Invalid string should also be accepted. But if the machine keeps on looping here, now even if this is now a final state for the complement, it will never have the option to read this and eventually accept. Okay. So just switching the final and non-final states will not work. Okay. So for that, we need something more to do. Okay. So the idea is that if M is a DPDA, okay, if M accepts, M. That means there is a unique way of doing this. M consume the entire input followed by this, and then it is in a final state. Okay. But if M rejects, so this is if and only if condition, but if M rejects, it may loop without consuming the entire input. Which consists of both this and this. Okay. So somehow I have to take care of this looping behavior. Okay. So to detect this looping, to detect and remove this looping behavior. So that's an important thing we first need to address. Okay. Also, if you look at this thing, you can see that it may loop without saying this end marker. In these cases, if malformed string comes, that reject symbol is pushed to the top of the stack and it simply keeps on looping on that. On the other hand, it may also read this end of input and there are still something wrong with this stack, there are more A's, then it will again push the reject symbol to the top of the stack and it simply keeps on looping there. Okay. So this looping may happen before reading the entire input or after reading the entire input. Okay. So these two things are also important. Otherwise, we cannot make this construction work. Okay. So to detect and remove looping behavior, which may happen after or before reading this, as the example illustrates. Okay. So we have to take a note whether this is read already or not. Okay. So this is one thing. And second thing is that I augment this original machine M by adding a reject state R, and the augmented machine loops in the state R, after consuming the entire input, which includes the input string followed by this. So looping is now allowed only in this new state R after consuming this. No further looping will be allowed, and of course this kind of looping is fine because this is a looping after accepting, and we should have a loop like this only after the entire input is consumed. Okay, there is no other looping allowed. Okay, then only, and after that if I just switch the roles played by that R, reject state R and that T, then definitely this that machine, that augmented machine with the roles of R and T interchanged, that will accept precisely the complement of the language of the original machine. Okay. So this is basically a two-step process. Okay. First, I have to, maybe I add one new slide to it. So this is a two-step process. First, handle seeing this new marker, this. And second, I have to handle all loops except at the explicit accept and reject states. Okay. So the first step, so this is somewhat easier. So step 1, this is step 2. So this step 1, what I will do, if I have a machine like this, it has one start state, in general state P, and maybe a few final states. Okay. So this is the original machine. I will simply, this is Q, the set of state is called Q. I will make an identical copy of this machine. Okay. And I just rename the states with a prime. Okay. So if this is a start state S, the corresponding state here will be S prime. In general, if P is a state here, I will have a corresponding state P prime here. Okay. And if I have final states F, F1, F2 and so on, I will have corresponding final states F1 prime, F2 prime and whatever. Moreover, what I will do, I will now no longer make these states, so no longer final. Okay. So after this conversion, this will be all states F prime such that F was in F. The original states will not be final states or accept states, but their primed versions will be. And this will remain as usual, this. Okay. Moreover, all the transitions in Q will be valid in Q prime with only one exception. Okay. Okay. In this machine, if I call it M, then I call it M prime. In M, stay in M prime, this copy, except. Okay, if we have a transition of the form, read the end of input. First, this is not the first thing. You are in some state P, read end of input, and something from the top of the stack. Then you go to state Q, replacing A by beta. Okay. Now, replace every such transition, okay, by same thing, except that the final state will be not Q, but Q prime. Okay. So this copy essentially remembers that the end of input symbol is read. This copy remembers that the end of input symbol is not read. Okay. Okay, but without reading the entire input, including this end of input symbol, the machine cannot accept. So I have made these things. Okay. So let me illustrate this in connection with this example. Okay. what happens if I make this duplication? Okay, so this picture says it. Okay, so you recall that. What are the states? This is one thing. Okay, this is essentially reject configuration. This is another thing where this end of input is read. Okay, if it is something like this, more A's than B's, then it will actually push this R and loop here. And if that time this bottom marker is exposed, it will go and accept. So in the 2 copy, I have here 1 copy. I will make another copy, and I have to replace these 2 transitions by transitions from this copy to the second copy. So this is done here. Okay, all other things remain the same. Okay, I have replaced this from, it was a loop from Q to Q. Now I have changed this to Q prime. And that was a transition from Q to T. Now I have changed it to Q to T prime. Okay, and other things remain the same. Now this state has essentially become inaccessible. So anyway, that doesn't matter. So let there be an inaccessible state. We will not worry too much about this. And I have unmarked this as a final state and marked this as a final state. This remains the same. Sorry, here is a copying mistake. So this should not be there. Okay, there should not be any start state like this here. Okay. So this construction is fairly straightforward. And now, as I mentioned earlier, what about loops? So this is a loop, okay, which can run indefinitely. And this is the same loop. This loop may apply before reading this or after reading this. Okay. So somehow I have to handle these loops now. And if I can do it, this construction is complete. Okay. First of all, I will introduce 2 new explicit reject states, R and R prime. Okay. So I will later see how we actually come to R or R prime. So the task of this is also some kind of reject state, but before reading the end of input marker. Okay. The task of this reject state is to consume whatever is left in the input. Okay. So whatever is there in the stack, just keep it as it is. Instead, just consume the remaining part of the input. Okay. And this is for all A in sigma. Okay. We will have this transition. And then, if it reaches the explicit end of input, then if this is read, then don't disturb the stack. Just go to R prime. And here you just make a loop of that form, epsilon, read nothing, whatever is there on the top of the stack, let's just keep it as it is. Okay. So R says that this is a reject state, but the entire input is still not consumed. So consume it, then eventually read this end of input marker, go to this explicit reject state finally. And here you simply loop on this epsilon. Okay. So question is, it is not yet clear how I come here or here. Okay. This is how what I have to mention. Okay. So first of all, a loop need not happen only on a single state. It may be something like this. It's an infinite loop of this form that involves multiple states. Possible. Okay. Now, of course, in this, in our previous example, here, this is a single state loop, but it may happen in a cycle, okay, like this. So this is an infinite loop, okay. not necessarily consist of just one state, but it may consist of multiple states. There are several things you need to note that. This is an infinite loop where the machine eventually falls back to. Okay, this is an infinite loop. Okay, so this implies two things. First, all the transitions must be epsilon transitions. Why? Because if some real symbol is read in this infinite loop, then you are consuming more and more of the input, and the input is finite, so this cannot happen for an infinite amount of time. So they must all be epsilon transitions. Epsilon, epsilon, epsilon. Okay. So this is the first implication. Second, if you look at any point of time somewhere, okay, here or here or here, when you eventually come back to the same state, okay, the important thing is that the stack cannot be eventually smaller. Cannot eventually shrink in a loop. Of course, from here to here there may be a shrinkage of the stack. Here to here there may be shrink, but overall you cannot have a shrinkage of the stack, because before coming here the stack contained a finite amount of memory, a finite amount of elements, finite number of elements, and by simply rotating along this infinite loop you cannot empty the stack. Okay, if this thing happens, then the stack eventually will become empty. That is not allowed. And if the stack is strictly smaller here, okay, then this is a deterministic machine. Okay, so therefore these two conditions are important to identify which, I would say, P epsilon A, okay, may lead to looping. Okay, so there are finitely many possibilities for P, finitely many states. The stack symbols is also, the set of stack symbols is also finite, and this must also be this form. So if I make a graph of all this P epsilon A for all possible values of A and for all possible values of, for all possible values of P and for all possible values of A, and I can detect cycles in that graph, okay, and can see whether the shrinkage of this stack, this condition is met, and then only I can identify those transitions, epsilon transitions of the form P epsilon A, okay, to be bad, which will lead to infinite loops. Okay, and that can be done by drawing a graph and finding cycles in that graph. Okay, it's not a difficult process. Okay, and if it happens like this, if I can detect something like that, some behavior like that, then what I will do, okay, so I have something like this. This is a bad state which is involved in a loop. Then what I will do, I will make this epsilon transition go here. Epsilon A is on the top of the stack. Let it be there, go there. Okay. If P is an unprimed state, okay, where this end of input is not yet read. On the other hand, if I have such a situation, after reading the end of input marker, that is, if I have something like this, P prime epsilon A, which is bad, which leads to looping, and I have detected such a loop after seeing the input, then I will give a transition of this form. Epsilon, keep this tag as it is, but since end of input is read, you can now simply go to this R prime and keep on looping on this epsilon loop. Here, this is an unprimed state, so end of input is not read. So go here. Anyway, this will lead to looping. So go here, consume the rest of the input, then eventually read this end of input, and now loop here. So now R prime is the only state where looping happens, because all further loops are broken this way. Okay. Now if I simply interchange the role of R prime and T prime, this machine is going to accept precisely the complement of the given language. So let us see what happens if we work on this. Here I have two things. I have to remove this and this. So these are bad things. So this is precisely what is done here. Okay. This will no longer loop on this. Okay, these loops are all on this valid symbols A and B. Here also this is A and B. If this looping behavior is detected, or we know that this leads to looping behavior, we simply go here. Okay. And then I allow. This is for the case when this looping is done before looking at the end of this thing is read. And here the looping happens when this E is read. Okay. So now this will simply jump to R prime here. And otherwise it will come here, read the rest of the input, A's and B's, without modifying the stack. Eventually this thing will come, this marker will come, it will read and it will jump to R prime. Okay. So after all this, switch the role of R prime and T prime. Okay. Then switch the roles of R prime and T prime. So this is an explicit reject state. This is an explicit accept state. Looping is allowed only here and here. Looping here means, of course, infinite looping. Okay. So infinite looping is possible in only these two states, because I have broken all other possible loops. Okay. So this eventually establishes that DPDA are closed under complement. So if we look at this language L, WW, where W is in A, B, star, we know that this is not context free. However, we have proved that the complement of L, that is AB star minus L, is context free. Okay. But if this is deterministic context free, the complement of L, which is this, will also be deterministic context free, right? But we know that this language is not context free at all. Okay. So this implies this not L is CFL, but not deterministic context free. Impossible, because they are closed under complement. Okay, so if I once again make a note of this, I will get this, which is not even context free. Okay, so you get your first example of a language which is context free but not deterministic context free. there are some other interesting properties. Maybe I will just overshoot a little bit. So there are other properties. So they are closed under complementation, but DPDA is not closed essentially. I should better write DCFL are closed. Okay. So there are other things, they are not closed under intersection. They are not closed under union, not even under reversal. Okay, so why they are not closed under intersection? So consider this language, AM, BM, CN. Okay. It is easy to see that this is deterministic context free because this part we have already proved to be deterministic context free. Okay. And then you just read some independent number of C's. So you can design a DPDA for this. So this is a DCFL, their intersection. This is once again a DCFL. You read some number of A's irrespective of, and then look at this B power n, C power n part, which is a DCFL. And this will show that what is the intersection of these two? This is nothing but all strings of the form A power n, B power n, C power n. This is not even context free. Okay. So they are not closed under intersection. This is DCFL, this is DCFL. Their intersection is not even context free. Forget about being DCFL. Likewise, if I look at this, A power m, B power n, C power k, let's say m is not equal to n, and A power n, B power n, C power k, n is not equal to k. Okay, now let us consider this language. Like this, you are essentially checking inequality, m not equal to n. So you can actually design a deterministic pushdown automaton for this. And then the C power k, k is arbitrary. Okay. You can easily prove that this is a DCFL. Likewise, here m can be arbitrary, only n and k must mismatch the number of b's and number of c's. Once again, you can design a DPDA for that. So these two languages are in general DCFL. But their union is not. Why? Because intuitively, first of all, you do not know you are going to check this condition or this condition. Okay. So that is the intuitive reason why this cannot be deterministic context free. You have to make one guess. I am going here or here. Okay. And in a situation when m is not equal to n and n is not equal to k, there are two ways of accepting this. Okay. So for a formal proof, let us consider this not L. Okay. And if I intersect this with A star, B star, C star, you know that the intersection of a context-free language and a regular language is context-free. But what will be this? This will be of this form: A power n, B power n, C power n. Okay. So this is not even context-free. Forget about deterministic context-free. So if L is deterministic context-free, okay, the complement of L will be deterministic context-free and therefore context-free. And then its intersection with this regular language will be context-free, but we know that this is not even context-free. Okay. So they are not closed also under union. Okay. But they are closed under complement, not closed under intersection, not closed under union. Reversal thing, actually it's a little bit complicated, but again I can give you an example. Consider this: b a power m, b power n, c power k. Let's say m not equal to n, union c a power m, b power n, c power k, such that n is not equal to k. Okay. If you read this from this end, then by looking at whether your b is your first symbol or c is your first symbol, you can actually find out whether the number of a's or number of b's do not match. Okay. And here, if it is c, you just check whether number of c's, number of b's and number of c's do not match. So it's easy to see that this language is deterministic context free, this language is deterministic context free. Intuitively, however, if you read from the back, okay, before seeing this b or c, this you will see in the end. Okay. But before that, you have to make a decision whether you are comparing this with this or this with this. Informally, this is the reason this is not okay, the reversal of this is not DCFL. This is not this upon reversal. Okay. Because without looking at this, you will look at this b or c at the end. Okay. Before that, you have to take a decision. Okay. Whether you are going to compare m with n or n with k. Okay. It's because of this, intuitively at least, but it requires a formal proof, which you may think about how to do. Okay. So they are not closed under reversal as well. So the CFLs and DCFLs, they are quite different. Okay. In fact, we have seen that CFLs are not closed under complement, but they are closed under union. They are actually also closed under reversal, but anyway, whatever it is. So CFLs and DFLs are different things, and CFLs are more powerful than DCFLs, or in other words, this is a bigger class. CFL is a bigger class of languages than the class of DCFLs. In other words, this non-deterministic PDA are more powerful than deterministic PDA. Okay, so with that, I end today's session. Bye. So that's all about we have to say about context-free languages and pushdown automata. Next, we will start Turing machines. Okay, see you. Bye.